Hello and welcome to the Divine Feminine Week of the Rebecoming the One Symposium. I'm Vanessa Nixon and I'm here with Martha Alter Hines, and today we're going to be speaking with Michelle Dench. We're so happy to have you here with us today, Michelle.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be with the both of you as well.
Yes, and I would love to take just a minute to let everybody know a little bit more about you. Michelle Dench is an intuitive astrologer, teacher, and artist. She is the treasurer and vice president of NCGR San Francisco. Her expertise is in relationships and family dynamics in the natal chart. In addition to being an astrologer, she is a painter and mother of three. She spends her time practicing, learning, and loving. You can learn more about Michelle at astrologywithmichelle.com.
Wonderful. And I'll just say, Michelle also was a speaker in Rebecoming the One last year. And I'm really happy to have you again, Michelle. And I'm really looking forward to diving into your perspective on remembering the heart of the feminine. Because that is an overlap we have of many, which is our relationship to the feminine and in astrology and life and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So yay.
Yay. Yeah.
Where do we want to start? What is alive? Why did this, I guess one way we could start is, Michelle, when you agreed to be a speaker for the Rebecoming the One and specifically for the Divine Feminine Week, why this topic? Why did this arise for you, do you think?
It arose totally spontaneously, Martha. As soon as you asked me what I'd want to talk on, I thought, oh, it's about remembering the heart of the feminine. And I want to distinct the word remembering because it means a few things to me. One, astrologically speaking, a big part of this summer, and when I'm talking about the summer, I'm speaking to from basically about mid-June 2023 all the way through October. You could even say as far from actually the end of the last eclipse cycle, which was May, to October, which is the next set of eclipses. There is a period of time in which we will see actually 99% of planets that we would consider astrologically in what we would call retrograde motion. The peak of it is August 29th, where all planets except for Jupiter are retrograde. And, you know, we just went through a period of Mercury retrograde. Pluto is retrograde right now. It's just going to continue to cycle. But the heart of it, actually, the intensity of it comes through during the time when Venus is retrograde. And this begins in June when she enters Leo, and then she will go through a complete retrograde cycle from 28 degrees Leo to 12 degrees and back. And then, you know, that happens during an incredibly important time from an evolutionary astrology perspective. It happens at the peak time when Pluto is in its square to the nodal axis, and Pluto will also be retrograde during that time. The nodal axis naturally moves retrograde. So there's a huge process that happens during the retrograde. And for those who don't know astrology, let me just explain, like, retrograde motion is the apparent seeming backwards movement of the planets, right? And from an astronomical perspective. But what it is from a soul perspective is a heightened period of evolutionary growth, right? And we often refer to retrograde times as, well, old people come back. We're remembering things, we're redoing things, we're reviewing things. When we talk about the feminine, Venus, right? This is everything that relates to love, to money, to our relationships. And with this combination of Venus and Pluto together, it's also about the bottom line core conditioning of our desires, the emergence of where our souls are both wanting to be in a completely new reality and unable to do so until we rectify, resolve, face, and dissolve what little is left of the past conditioning, or what lot is left, right? There might be a lot of our conditioning that is based on the past. And in this case, at this particular time, when Venus stations retrograde, she is the ruler of the South Node. And in evolutionary astrology, the South Node reflects the past, or the conditions from which we came from. And it is, in this case, also the node of resolution, or the place where we would resolve the karmic dynamics of the past. And how do we resolve the past? By doing something, or resolving something, or seeing something, facing something from the past in a new way. And so that kind of brought forward the idea of, well, this is about remembering the heart of the feminine, because Venus will be in the heart of Leo, which is ruled by the sun. And it's all about the heart. It's all about creative energy and creative power. And the South Node will be in Libra, which is really about relationships. And so we're learning how to remember what we were, who we were before we were told who we were, and how we loved and how we did relationships before we were conditioned to do relationship from a place of suppression, fear, domination, anxiety, and depression might be byproducts of having lived in that way, but they are not the cause, right? And so when we're talking about this remembering, it's about remembering the roots of who we are too, like the truth of who we are. And this to me seems like the theme of rebecoming the one, because if we know ourselves as one, both one with the beloved, one with the other, anyone, one with our source, one with our creator, then it's really about remembering who that is from the center of our being, from the center of our heart, and learning how to live in that way, how to relate in that way, how to do family and work, how to manage our money with that in mind. How do we, we're all in the world. We have these things that, we're not I hear that all the time, spiritual beings having a human experience, but most of us are identified with being human beings. And I would say before we're spiritual beings, we are conditioned beings having a limited experience where we've learned from that limitation. Or, part of what I've been meditating on is like, where did we learn how to love? We learn how to love from our mothers, from witnessing our mother be loved, or witnessing her relationship to our father. This square from Pluto to the nodal axis activates the cardinal cross in astrology. So it activates Cancer and Capricorn, which have to do with mother and father. And it activates Aries and Libra, which have to do with Mars and Venus. So we're talking about the foundation of life itself, what creates life on earth in the human experience, mother, father, masculine, feminine, right? Regardless of our gender expression or our identity, right? Those would be Aquarius, Leo things, Taurus, Scorpio things, our sexual orientation, our, drives for pleasure. The cardinal cross is like the roots of that conditioning from which all life is emerging. And that is the biggest part of our world, our culture, wherever it's rooted in the past, in the patriarchy, in conditioning of suppression of the feminine, but also suppression of the feminine naturally leads to suppression of the masculine. And every other expression on earth comes through that same suppression. So we can't talk about suppression or oppression as only, hurting one or few categories of people. And to me, the remembering the heart of the feminine exists inside of all beings, because all beings possess a natal chart and have a Venus and a Mars and a moon and a sun. And so that's kind of the framework. And then there's a little subnote to this remembering to me, which was like, oh, the remembering, what does that mean? It means to put back together, to return something that was lost, or to member it, to sew it back together, to stitch it back together. And, to where the heart of the feminine, the softness, the gentleness, the care, the love, the tenderness, that is what we might associate with the feminine, with being loved, with even with the mother, has been kind of torn apart, whether by the world or our past traumas or hurts, or being brokenhearted is often seen as a bad thing, but it can be an opening. Actually, it can be a breaking open of the heart. And so this idea that we're in a process of remembering is kind of like, how do we stitch the heart back together, or bring back the information in the heart that is natural to its knowing of itself?
Wow, that's a lot you just given us there. And as someone who is not an astrologist, I really appreciate you breaking some of those things down. And even so, it's a lot to try to stitch together. And so a couple of questions have come up for me as you've been talking. The first one is just, you mentioned that most of the planets are going to be in retrograde during this period. Not being an astrologist, is that a big thing? It sounds like this is a huge thing. Does that happen often? Is this, can you speak more to that? And then the second question is, so during this time, which sounds like it can be a really powerful moment for us, do you have any, practical tips or, of how we can work with these energies?
Great. Both great questions. You might have to remind me to answer the second question after we get through the first. So retrograde planetary activity. For some planets, it is more common. For example, Pluto spends 6 months of the year, half its time retrograde. Mercury is probably the most commonly known retrograde planet because it's a great, blame the Mercury retrograde for why your thing is not breaking down, right? Although Mercury stationed direct, and then my computer started having problems. So, there you go. Venus retrogrades are less common, that she does not retrograde. And what is unique about the Venus retrograde cycle is that her process of being retrograde over the course of a longer period of time makes what we would call a flower of life symbol in the sky, from the point when she conjoins with the sun to the next point during her direct period to the next point. And these basically 5-pointed stars that overlap each other year over year over year end up having very significant they can basically create significant activated points. There's a whole thing on the Venus star cycle, and maybe Martha, you might even be able to link. I can send you a resource guide on Venus star points and a little bit more on Venus. So Venus's retrograde is very less frequent, let's say, and same with Mars. Mars did a retrograde last year, won't retrograde again for 2.5 years. It's a longer period of time between some of these other planets. Jupiter will retrograde once this year, and that is also an interesting thing because this year Jupiter's retrograde is in the same degrees as Mercury's retrograde was. So it's like, it's a phenomenon that is common and more frequent for some planets and less common and less frequent for other planets. So to have a period of time where almost every planet is retrograde is, probably a combination of things, but in this case, it's a once in a lifetime thing. Our souls, the people living on this planet at this time, will never see this happen ever again. So that to me makes its significance even greater. And when we think about where we are as a culture and as a civilization, this Pluto retrograde, squaring the nodal axis with all of these planets retrograde, we are at a historical and critical collective moment where all of who we are and all human beings and all humanity have to make a change, right? And I'm talking about an evolutionary change, one that redefines how humanity moves forward for the next 250 years. But this will never happen again in this way ever. And we will never see this in our lifetime as these embodied, people. From a soul perspective, the retrograde periods, as Jeffrey Wolf Green teaches, is an acceleration of that evolutionary function. So it means that if you're born, many people are born with retrograde planets, right? Those planets are bringing forward an acceleration of that function of change, of growth, right? It is a powerful signature then for us all to be experiencing it. And I'm highlighting Venus because her retrograde in this case is the most rare. And she makes a rare aspect to Pluto during the start and the finish of this retrograde, which I find really significant. And so I've been tracking her relationship to Pluto throughout this year, from where at the end of last year they were conjunct together to where they will be this, during this time, this summer, in what we would call an inconjunct, which is a pretty rare, but I find one of the most significant aspects. It's like one part of a finger of God. And I think of it as the thing that you have to change, that has to be moved forward in order for everything else to move forward, right? So hopefully that answered your question. If you have more, keep it coming.
Thank you. Yes, when you first brought it up, it sounded like, oh, this is a big thing, and I really appreciate you expanding on that. And my second question was, how do we work with these energies? If this is a once in a lifetime occurrence, those of us that want to take advantage of, really doing the work, how do we do that?
Beautiful question. I mean, that's been my entire focus as an astrologer and as a teacher this year. I'm teaching a course called Love Evolution, which is entirely devoted to this topic, following Venus through all the signs and looking at the dynamics in love and relationship that have to evolve. And, in our own lives, this story is going to be different for each person. What is calling you? You know, what are we facing in our life that it's like, this has to change because nothing else can survive without it, right? And it can be in our work, it can be in our relationships, it can be in the way that we're dealing with money, it can be in our inner dialogue, it can be in our creative power. Venus in the sign of Leo speaks very much to creativity, joy, children, being seen. And if there are ways in which we have blocked ourselves from our own light, from loving and from being in a state of joy, just as natural as that is, right? Everything is created to be in a state of joy. Children are a great example of that. They are born with that luminescence, right? That they're born with the sunlight of the spirit inside of them, and they reflect to us joy and innocence, and they're, so easy to love. I have a little baby girl, right? And she's 10 months old, and I wake up every morning and she opens her eyes to me, and it's just like, oh my God, there's so much love inside of her, right? Makes me want to cry just thinking about it. And that's like, when we're talking about remembering the heart of the feminine, we were born that way. This is a remembering of an essential truth that exists within us as a part of our birthright. Joy is our birthright. Love is our birthright. These even, a lot of people come to me looking for, like, when am I going to be in a relationship? When am I going to meet someone who meets me on the level, the calling for sacred partnership, for marriage, and for soul union is like a big calling that I feel. And yet, how can we do that when we've built ideas of marriage that are essentially rooted in the laws of slavery? That in the United States, marriage laws in the 1700s were born out of colonial thinking around keeping and segregating white and Black slaves, right? That's the roots. And that's not even like maybe the original roots of where marriage was an institution of women being considered essentially a possession, right? That could be bought or sold through a dowry. And, there's all this conditioning, Pluto in Capricorn conditioning, that is being broken down through this time. And in each and every one of our lives, this invitation during this time is an invitation to evolve. And how do we do that? Yeah, it was your question, like, how do we kind of survive the heat of the probably one of the most intense periods of evolutionary growth in our lifetime ever. Not to say that there won't be other challenging times, right? But we have to remember that if the only goal is to truly know who I am, and if the only outcome is to recognize and remember myself as love, then there's nothing that can happen to me that is not ultimately guiding me back towards that memory, right? In the evolutionary journey, often we find we have crisis in our lives. We get a breast cancer diagnosis, or a family member dies, or we have a traumatic event, or we lose a job, right? Or a relationship breaks apart, right? And where those experiences break up our sense of identity, our connection to what is known and solid, and they break open our heart in a way because they change what we know to be true. They can be the most catalyzing experiences to actually remember the truth of who we are. And many people say, well, when I lost everything, and I'm not saying that people are going to lose everything this summer, right? It's everyone is impacted differently by the transits, and not, this isn't catastrophic news 101. It's essentially good news. The good news is, right, Venus is inviting us to get to the heart of knowing ourselves, knowing how to tend our heart, knowing how to access our joy, knowing how to be grounded in our lives and to love one another in a new way by facing the past, by releasing the past, releasing past conditioning. So it's like, how do we do that? Well, find our way back to our joy. Remember things you used to do as a kid, rediscover things about yourself that you didn't know before, somebody told you who you were, right? As soon as a child is born, they want to label the gender and they want to give them a name, and right, all of that is given by the conditioned world, right? But did we ever just, curiously wonder who is this being that I'm beholding? What are they? It's like, if we lose that curiosity about ourselves, about the people that we're in relationship to, about the world that we live in, all of a sudden we don't notice a flower and how incredibly beautiful it is. We don't, and the retrograde periods often indicate a slowing down, but it's not necessarily slow. And that means that we kind of have to take our steps a little bit more carefully, and we have to slow things down in order to really understand what's happening. Or if something comes back up from the past that is triggering or challenging, we have to face it again. We have to look at it again, but in a new way, and in order to resolve it, in order to change it. So those are a few of the things that I can think of.
There's another component that keeps coming up for me in all of this. I'm curious your thoughts on it. So astrologically, one thing I've been paying a lot of attention to is the role of Eros, the asteroid. So when Venus goes retrograde, it will be exactly opposite Eros. And when Pluto entered Aquarius in March 2023, it was conjunct Eros. So something that's coming up for me a lot in my praying and in myself is this feeling that we're being given an opportunity to maybe reimagine, remember our relationship to sexuality, to Eros, whatever that is, and Venus going retrograde in Leo, opposite Eros. I mean, that's like such powerful energies around all of that creative life force energy. And yeah, so do you have any reflections on that component of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm constantly learning a lot about the presence of Eros, the cultivation of Eros, and how it shows up. But relative to the retrograde, and even just to the soul work, Eros is creative life force, right? It is that indwelling creative spirit. We also think of it and maybe mistakenly mix it up with lust or desire, right? Those are kind of tricky words. But Eros to me is like pure fire, the pure fire of life. I've been reading about immaculate conception, when the sperm and the egg meet together, that there's a burst of light, and that this idea that all beings, all souls emanate from this burst of light, right? That is Eros. And it's also that spark that draws us to create, to be joyful. It has a very playful, often uncontrollable, right? Like fire, we can burn ourselves on fire, or it can warm us, or, but it's a powerful energy. And a part of, I think, what we're relearning in love and sexuality is how to work with Eros, how to cultivate Eros, how to share Eros in a way that is not harmful, right? And not suppressive. And I think when I think about where Eros gets quelched or destroyed is often in where Eros becomes anger, or where Eros becomes distortion, or it's distorted into lust. Eros converts to anger or hatred as a like as a hurt, where Eros gets quelched by unexpressed feelings, unmet needs, resentments, hurts from the past, right? Where we aren't able to access Eros if there is a suppression of our authentic self. We aren't able to access Eros if we have a backlog of emotion or feeling or hurt that has not been resolved. And I've been learning a lot about this. And in this retrograde period of time, it's a really significant time to be facing those things and resolving and releasing that energy for the purpose of reconnecting to that fundamental life force. Because imagine a humanity where all people are connected to the inherent indwelling creative life force of source. The love and the freedom to be able to share that love in total safety with everyone without fear of harming themselves or harming others, right? And we know how to use and work with our creative energy, our sexual energy, with integrity, with care, and with devotion, right? What kind of world would we live in if Eros was free to be in that world? People would also be free to love, and that would heal humanity on a level that, I've experienced only in visions at this point in my life. But I'm aware that, we don't have visions unless the fulfillment of them is possible.
Yeah, similar. And one thing I want to bring in is Vanessa, for the symposium. Her talk is on I'm blanking on the exact title, Vanessa, but essentially on the origins of belly dance. And she's doing an optional workshop on sacred belly dance. And so I'm thinking of maybe, Vanessa, I don't know if you want to give like the teeny tiny 10-second brief synopsis of the history of belly dance. But what I'm personally thinking of is when I think of Eros and different ways that we can come back into a relationship with the true essence of it. I'm thinking of you, Vanessa, and belly dance, and you're a belly dance instructor, among other things, right? So, and as Vanessa can explain herself, the history of it is so interesting and so cool, and not what I ever thought it was. I don't know if Vanessa, you want to?
Yeah, thank you, Martha, for bringing that up, because I do see this direct connection, especially Michelle, as you were talking about the distortion of Eros. And I think that's what we have right now in our culture when we think about belly dance. But, traditionally and originally, thousands of years ago, when belly dance was created as an art form, it was created for a woman's body. All of the moves are designed to help her body support her through the various phases of her life. And it was performed by women, only for women, the elders, the mature women of the community would gather with all the other women, and they would teach each other these movements and these dances. And so it was by women, for women, and the dance itself, the different parts of the dance tell the story of womanhood. And so it was a way for women to connect with each other, to connect with themselves on a deeper level, as feminine, beings, to connect to that feminine energy, and continue it, through their communities, and support each other and support themselves. And so that's, I think, the most beautiful thing about belly dance in particular, and how it relates to the divine feminine.
Yeah. And I
That
think
a perfect and practical example of something to do this summer is like watch Vanessa's talk, learn and take classes and practice, right? Practice belly dancing, because it would like both connect with remembering something that's deeply ancient and inherent to the body, to the feminine body, right? And it would connect you with your heart. And it sounds to me like it's doing that thing of Venus and Leo, of unlocking joy and creative spirit and eros. Yeah, thank you.
whenever I even go into like the first 2 seconds of Vanessa's movement guidance, I feel all this grief just need to come out of my body. And I mean, I haven't figured out completely totally what that is yet. I think it's an ancient deep knowing, or that has been kind of pushed away probably for eons, probably for many lifetimes. That's my feeling on it. But I need time, I need space to just, I think actually the summer, honestly, after the symposium, when I have space and my kids are not with me for a little while, I think that's what part of what my soul will have me do is, what is that grief that's coming up? It's really interesting.
And
Yeah.
that is such a critical part of remembering the heart, Martha. I mean, I think that piece right there, that's like the restitching part. If we haven't felt or met grief, whether it's loss in our lives, and this is the cardinal axis, so it's like mother, father loss, it's masculine, feminine loss, it's everyone and everything, that core structure that gives us the foundation of what we experience as human beings on life. Like that's the kind of remembering. It feels to me like if we don't give ourselves permission to feel everything, that's where it comes back up. And so this is another really great example of what to do during this time, is really allow more space for the grief to emerge. Feel things when they show up in your life, when things from the past come back, when there's, your phone gives you a memory, it's like a memory of that, and it like sparks a feeling inside of you when you think about someone that you haven't talked to in a long time, and you feel that call to reach out. If there are relationships in your life that are broken, I've had a lot of people coming to me recently, mothers estranged from their daughters, family members who have lost people very close to them. There's so much grief in our collective right now, relationships that are ending. And it really doesn't matter if, that was the one, or, whether it was a shorter relationship. There's grief in all of our experiences until we've allowed our heart to fully feel what it feels. And in my own personal life, I've been really allowing myself the space to feel the depth of my grief when it comes up. And there's safety in doing that. when we've really carved out the space and the time and the care and the things that we need in order to tend our hearts, in order, it can feel overwhelming if our life is too full. So it's another thing that you can do is kind of try to say no to more things and create more space in your day. And the feminine is very spacious, and then that spaciousness, right, that womb space, it will be filled with something, but we have to, in order to give ourselves enough space to feel things, I think there's got to be an intentional creating of that.
And another maybe related thing that comes up for me is when we're going back a little bit to the sexuality and the belly dance and all that. And when I think about Venus going retrograde and ruling the South Node in Libra, then there's this whole theme. Okay, and the nodes being squared by Pluto. There's this whole theme that comes up for me around where we choose to put our sense of power, like where do we look to get our needs met, right? Like so when I think about deconditioning and coming into a new way of relating, or a new way of loving, or a new way of being with that Eros energy, all of it, I think of the balance that there is, that we're not an island, and therefore we do need relationship. And at the same time, there's I know, okay, I speak for myself, there's a lot I have looked to an other to fulfill. And I, of course, get reminded over and over again, okay, it's coming ultimately from inside myself. And yes, I also need an other. But for example, I thought about, recently I've been thinking about sexuality and Eros and all of that, and how if we're being called into a new way of being with creative life force, and like that Leo energy and the Eros energy and the Venus and Leo and all of that, to give a really stereotypical example, I think it's pretty common for people in relationships, and me, I'm thinking of women in heterosexual relationships in particular, but I would guess it's true in lots of, especially longer term relationships, where I think a lot of women I know are coming into a time where they feel this, like this imperative that there's like this, the sexuality, the energy of the sexuality is so powerful, and it needs to do something new, like it needs to do something differently. Or there's like this is what I hear from a lot of women around my age, right, our ages, but and in my 40s, right? So it's like there's a new, they can feel in themselves that there's a new way that their sexuality, their Eros life force is needing and wanting to be and express and all of that. And then often what will happen is that they get really frustrated with their partner.
Mm-hmm.
When if I like step back and I think about, okay, what are they really wanting here? I don't think they can find it from their partner. I think it's this energy, this Eros energy that's inherent in them, like that comes through in the belly dance, that's like, it just is who we are. And I think what they're ultimately deeply want, I speak for myself, what I ultimately deeply want is to tap into the reality that I am the energy of source, right? And that's where like the most beautiful healing relationship to life force energy can possibly come from. That cannot be evoked in me by a human. I mean, that might help, but ultimately it has to be my own relationship to it. And right, so my own deconditioning has to really start with me. And then ideally, if I'm in a partnership, ideally that partner is of course gonna be supportive of that, but I can't expect them to like make things exciting, or do you see what I'm saying? Yeah.
So much of that resonates. And I think it speaks to kind of this dynamic balance between power and purpose and passion. Like if those three things simultaneously, if they are pointing to someone else, if you need someone else in order to have those things, there will be a distortion, a misidentification of having to possess that thing, that person, having to have that in order to, and it's like, that is a part of the reclaiming process where we come to recognize, oh, all these feelings that I have, the life force that I have, all of this energy is generated inside of me, right? And I think it's interesting from an evolutionary perspective, the Pluto square is pointing to like this dynamic energy. And in evolutionary astrology, when a planet squares the nodal axis, they talk about there being flip-flopping back and forth between the nodes, right? And one of the nodes is the resolution node, right? In this case, it's South Node Libra Venus. And the other is, right, not necessarily where we're going to get the resolution from, but it doesn't say that we wouldn't be going there. And it seems to me like this is kind of that same thing. It's like we might think we can resolve our problems through another person, through resolving the relationships, through getting the thing that we want, through having them behave the way that we want them to behave. Or we might think that like we can resolve through them changing or through the outside circumstances changing, right? And none of that is going to be true or get us the result that brings the lasting change, because if I'm talking about the other, right? And this could be your partner, divine counterpart. This could be your mother, your father, your family member. This could be your boss at work. It doesn't matter who the other is. They have their own free will. They may or may not join you in choice to make a change. They have nothing to do with the feelings that emerge from inside of you. When you get to the roots of it, that eros, that creative life force, we often project it onto another. We often say like, oh, that person makes me feel good, or that person is attractive to me. And it's like, no, like that's a projection of our seeing them in a particular way that generates a feeling which is inside of us. Even that person giving me an orgasm is not necessarily, that is happening. It's happening inside of you, right? That all feeling, experience, perception is originating from inside of the soul that is experiencing it. And so that dichotomy of thinking like, well, if he changes, if this changes, if that changes, or if I can, force change or push change, right? And the pushback is going to be being pushed into surrendering to the change from within, to feeling what happens, to accepting total responsibility from within the relational dynamic to go to the roots of it, and that's where I think people can see immense shifts. And when we do that, when we actually do say, this is my creative life force, I reclaim it. And I was listening to this woman just before our interview today, and she was talking about, do I leave the relationship? Do I try and change the relationship? It's a very common question. And essentially she was saying something which I've been saying a lot recently, which is like, none of that matters unless there isn't an answer to that. Like that's kind of like flip-flopping between the nodes, unless we go right back to the source of our power, to the source of our creative power, to our heart. It's like, if you don't change the early childhood attachment patterning in yourself, you'll never experience externally secure attached relationship, because the same internal pattern will be tripped off every time the partner does that, or every time the feeling emerges, even if it has nothing to do with the partner doing anything. And that's where I think that there's such power in us remembering our heart, right? Because it's going back to that little imprinting and saying like, what's tender there? You know, what's hard that's happening right now, and like let me hold you, let me be with you, let me feel this, and in including giving myself full permission to reconnect with eros, to reconnect with feeling, to reconnect with creativity, you know, and not to make that dependent on, you know, one or the other, or someone else outside of me.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for your perspective. This is really fascinating to me to hear a more astrological perspective on this particular topic, because as you know, Martha, I don't know if you know Michelle, but you know, as a naturopath, I work specifically with women in midlife who are going through this transition. And what you're speaking of right now is so common for women in this time of their lives. And so I work with that and look at it from, you know, a natural holistic perspective. But I'm seeing you really talking about the same thing, you know, that this is such an incredible time of life for women to remember the heart of the feminine, remember who they are, and how the feminine has very different phases that we, you know, we tap into at different parts of our lives. And so I don't want to go off track too much on that conversation, but it's really fascinating to me to hear this other perspective on that, and how really the work that so many of us, especially as women, are doing really speaks to this same thing about really tapping into the feminine, the divine parts that are inside of us, and that how that is the key to making the change in the world that we want to make, being who we really are, and bringing our unique magic out into the world.
And I'm even thinking of just the reality that for me, the feminine, giving myself permission to be with the feminine energy. And even I'm thinking of Venus, like the cycle of Venus being so, well, all the cycles are cycles, but you know, that our process is going to be cyclical, not just because we happen to identify as women, but that's how life actually works, and that it's okay and actually good for us to be cyclical, like a spiral. We don't need to be a straight line. We don't need our soul evolution or our learning or any of it to be going from A to B, because that probably isn't real to begin with. And then also with coming back to Venus and this more divine feminine embodied way of being, you know, to have it be an embodied thing, so that when I'm thinking about all the soul growth that we're going through, and that probably lots of us will be feeling now and now, it's not something we need to do with our brains. Like, we don't need our brains to have an answer, and that's okay if they don't. They probably won't. I know mine does not. And and that I think that most of the soul growth, and certainly the Venus retrograde, to me is about being in the body, that our bodies know what to do. And like Vanessa, your work, you know, is so beautiful also, because your work is so much about the body wisdom, and lots of both you as a naturopath and you as the belly dance instructor, all of it seems to come back to the body. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so much of what we're doing with the work that we're doing, you know, is creating a new framework from which everything else is emerging. And I think the body is forgotten, or, the cycles are forgotten. Vanessa, when you were talking about the cycles, it's like all these cycles, the fertility cycle, 28 days, the lunar cycle, right? It's the same. And the birth cycle, also, Venus's cycle is 18 months. And that's essentially 2 9-month cycles, right? Stacked up on top of each other. Right? And everything is a cycle upon cycle. And even as I was speaking about, everything that's culminating during the middle part of this year, these are all within much larger, like 12-year, 20-year, 248-year cycles. They are huge. So I want to say there isn't any getting it right. There isn't any getting it done. There isn't anything you have to do. It's so much about undoing. It's and that what you're speaking about with the naturopathy, that can be such a huge resource for people, because everything that we experience through our mind actually comes through and affects the body on such a deep level. And so that, and everything, and one of the things I love about the new science that's emerging is that they're saying that the heart actually gives off electromagnetic signals that are stronger than on and before the brain. So the heart can know that something is happening before the brain knows that something is happening, which is why it feels like so critical that we are attuned to our hearts. And then what they say the number one killer of women is heart disease. And what is that, right? It's like cardiovascular functioning on a medical level, but it's like what has happened that we don't feel our hearts, that we don't care for our hearts, that we don't know how to even tend to those things. I've been working a lot this year to research and learn about plant medicines that are particularly heart medicines, and being more attuned to the frequency of the heart and what that is, because if that has the information before my brain has it, then I want to learn how to trust that predominantly and listen to that predominantly, and have my brain and my thought process, like Martha, when you were saying our mind is not going to solve the problem, you're absolutely right. And the level of confusion I see people in, and the lack of clarity that can happen in life when there's so much changing and so much uncertain, there is such an invitation right now to be able to rest in something that knows more and not have to figure anything else out from that place. So it feels really important.
Yes, I love that you brought that piece in, and it feels like that's kind of come full circle to, at the beginning when we were, introducing this talk as remembering the heart of the feminine. And it seems like we've really brought in all the different angles of, the astrology of it, and, the movement piece, the body piece, the holistic, more naturopathic piece. And it's all pointing to the same thing. And I love how you described it as, stitching it together. It seems like that's, what we've been doing throughout this conversation, is stitching all the various pieces back together of the heart of the feminine. And it's been really lovely.
Thank you.
I agree. I love all the weaving. Super beautiful. Reminds me of the Venus cycle, actually. Just yeah, really beautiful. Is there anything else you feel called to say, Michelle?
On my website, at Astrology with Michelle, if you go to the soul work page, at the bottom of the page, there's a free video, which is the overview of the entire Venus Pluto cycle. I went into and I taught like the basis of everything that I've been following for this year. So if there's more you want to learn about the astrology itself, I do that with charts and talk about the whole connection. And yeah, and I think that, no matter what, the evolutionary journey is about returning to our source. And I believe at the bottom line, our source is love, and that is the remembering. That's the functional place from which I'm operating, and how I see astrology, and why I use this as a tool for reflection. And so it can sound scary, lots of retrogrades, lots of soul work, and can sound very hard and very grueling. But I want to bring the perspective that there is nothing harder in life than living out of love and living out of alignment with our heart. That is the hard work. And where we are returning, oh, this makes me want to cry. Where we are returning to a perception of love, and where we are returning to a connection to our heart, there is no hard work. So
And yeah, I'm just feeling like I also want to say that, of course, all of this applies to people of any gender, not just people who identify as women. And I was just reading an article yesterday, maybe both of you have seen, from Harvard, talking about how loneliness is now, in the longitudinal study that Harvard has done starting in the 30s, that they're finding that loneliness is just as deadly as alcoholism and one other thing. But anyway, loneliness is like the #1 killer for men in particular. And so it seems to fit right in with what we're talking about. And clearly this doesn't only apply to women. Yeah.
I mean, in this lifetime, I was given a female body at birth, and I identify as a woman. And so that's the perspective that I can speak from my own direct experience. And I hold that all of this actually is deeply interconnected, and hold space for all of my fellow souls. I think I was probably a man in the last lifetime, and it doesn't matter whether it's the last lifetime or this lifetime, whether we identify with any, gender. Everyone has the same, everyone is a soul, everyone came from love, everyone returns to that love, and everyone requires connection to that love. And we come into relationship with one another to learn about that love, to learn how to love, to practice, to unlearn the things that we were taught that were not love, right? So much of what is taught about love is not love at all. And it is, it's ego, it's hurt, it's distortion, it's not love. And so at the core, everyone benefits when we remember our heart, when we learn how to love. Everyone benefits, every soul. And this applies, all souls are going to be experiencing the Pluto transit, all gender expressions, all bodies, everyone is going to have their own experience of it from the particular lens that the soul orientation, their natal chart, all of that is going to bring a very different and unique expression of that same divine journey that we're all on together. So
yes. And I'll just throw in there, actually. So of course, as I'm recording all these talks for all of the weeks of the symposium, I'm doing them all together, right? Even though they're going to come out one topic at a time per week. But so yesterday I recorded a talk with Mark Tollefson, who's my co-facilitator for the Divine Masculine Week, which is going to be next week. For those of you watching the Divine Feminine Week in the week it's released, the Divine Masculine comes next week. And so we were recording my interview of him. And what he was talking about is essentially his perspective on the deepest grief of the masculine. And I would say 3 or 4 times in that conversation, which ended up being a very long conversation, he and I both at different points were crying or on the verge of crying, because there is so much grief for everybody, all of the above, right? Not crying like sobbing, but just, just clearly like a lot of emotion would come up for each of us at different moments. And yeah, so I just think there's so much here to explore for people of all genders, and that's what we're doing. That's why we're here. So it's great. All this weaves in throughout the whole month, and it's beautiful.
Oh, thank you, Martha, for bringing us all together this first time, and again and again and again. Thanks to you and your co-host now, Vanessa. I just really grateful to get to share this time with you both and share these perspectives, and just honored to be a part of this community of people.
Yay. I'm really glad you are. And I thought you and Vanessa would connect well. I'm really glad you got to connect.
Yes, I'm so grateful to have been a part of this conversation, and I'm sure it could go on and on and on, but I think this is a wonderful place that we've kind of brought it to, and so happy that you're a part of this symposium and this collaboration.
Thank
Great.
you.
And then the last thing, do you want to share anything about how people can find you, anything you're offering coming up, sessions you do, anything you want to share?
Love to. Yeah, if you go to astrologywithmichelle.com, that is my website. And I have a core monthly membership called the Evolution Student Membership. It's just $11 a month, and it includes a monthly transmission from me, a monthly new moon circle. All of my students get discounts to my classes. I offer a master class once a quarter, deep diving into something, right now it's on Jupiter and resources, called the Source of Resource, and that class is available for registration on my website. And yeah, and I do one-on-one private sessions with clients, and I work with students of astrology, people who love astrology and want to study in an apprenticeship model where you can work with your own natal chart. And it really works for anyone. You don't have to be an astrological student. It works for kind of deepening into chart dynamics. So you can find me there. You can subscribe to my newsletter, and I often do free classes and all kinds of fun stuff at astrologywithmichelle.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michelle.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa, too.
Welcome. Thank you.